Young people have dreams and hopes for their future, and every parent can agree that what they want for their children is to be future ready, to have the skills and opportunities they will need to succeed in the future. Yet innovation is transforming the way we work and bringing into question how educators and schools can best prepare students given the uncertain future of work. The world of work is rapidly changing, and most of the jobs that will exist in 20 years haven't even been created yet. It's impossible to know the science and technological skills students will need to succeed in the future. Also, a point on entrepreneurship. There is a growing interest among youth, and it requires a different set of skills. What we know, including from business leaders and employers, is that to succeed in the future, students will need skills to set and achieve goals, skills to manage emotions in the face of uncertainty and challenge, skills to identify and build relationships with good mentors who can help them succeed when work changes, skills to understand the needs of others, including supervisors, clients, and customers, and to show respect for others from different backgrounds, skills to communicate and collaborate with others from diverse backgrounds and fields. All of these competencies are what social and emotional learning is designed to teach. The most universal employability skills are interpersonal ones: communication, self-awareness, personal management, and being able to work with and get along with others. These are the same skills taught in quality SEL lessons and programs. In fact, employers say they can teach new hires relevant science and technology, but what they can't teach and often struggle to find are the foundational skills that social and emotional skills students will need for success. I am excited to introduce our new 5-part webisode series on this topic. In 2020, CASEL launched an initiative to strategically integrate social and emotional learning with career and workforce development. In partnership with 8 states, Delaware, Kansas, Nevada, North Dakota, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Wisconsin, and the generous support of Pure Edge, Inc., we are identifying and elevating policies to address inequities in youth employment and engage in an economic revival.
The reason I've learned it's important for communities to have a shared vision of student success is that it gets everyone on the same page, pulling in the same direction, emphasizing the same goals. When there's a shared vision of student success that's been developed by families, educators, and business leaders working together, it creates alignment and coherence within the system. It helps everyone become much more conscious of the critical competencies students will actually need to succeed in the future. So how do we prepare our children? How do we equip them for success in the future? We know they'll need academic skills, certainly, but we also know students are going to need other critically important skills. They're going to need a sense of purpose and passion, to be creative and able to solve problems, to be able to set and achieve goals, manage their time and emotions, communicate effectively, and also be able to adapt their communication for different audiences, which requires empathy and perspective taking. To build relationships, to resist negative influence, collaborate effectively on multicultural teams, that's teamwork, and be able to innovate and lead and solve big collective problems. A shared vision of success identifies what we all want for students. And for our communities to thrive, we need all students, each and every student, to be ready for the future. We need to ensure that all students have the competencies they'll need to succeed in the future. That's always when the magic happens, when the entire community shares a common purpose.
Very excited to kick off the second webisode coming you from CASEL, focusing on what works in SEL and workforce preparation. My name is Kate Kreamer. I'm the Deputy Exec Director at Advanced CTE. If you're not familiar with Advanced CTE, we are a national membership organization that represents state directors and other state leaders who oversee career technical education across the country. Our members are in all 50 states, DC, and the territories, and reside across state education agencies, community college systems, workforce development agencies, all the systems that make up career technical education. We've had the privilege of partnering with CASEL over the last few years around our efforts to develop, advance, and help states implement a shared vision for the future of CTE. This vision, called CTE Without Limits, calls for a world where each learner can access the career of their choice without limitations or barriers. This vision calls for each learner to feel welcome in, be supported by, and have the means to succeed in the career preparation ecosystem, and that each learner can navigate their own career journey seamlessly. Both of these principles require a focus on and deliver integration of SEL and learner-centered supports, which is why we're so excited to have CASEL on board as a supporter and partner. I'm thrilled to be here today with leaders from Pennsylvania to talk about how they have leveraged a state theory of action to advance SEL in collaboration and alignment with the broader career readiness and workforce development efforts. CASEL, with input from states and national leaders, developed the state theory of action, which was last updated in 2021, to serve as a tool for state teams to reflect on and advance the role of the state education agency in partnership with other agencies and their respective stakeholders to implement high-quality SEL across the state. We're going to hear from a leading state, Pennsylvania, in a few moments, which will really share about how important this theory of action is to ensuring the work is not only occurs, but is having a true impact at the learner level and has the right policies and practice in place to be sustained over time. So with that, I am very excited to be introducing two individuals from the Pennsylvania Department of Education, Laura Fridirici, who is a career readiness advisor and a special consultant to the Secretary for Career Readiness at the agency, as I mentioned, and Demetrius Roberts, who is on loan from a local intermediary as a special consultant to the agency, or the department, I should say, for STEM and computer science. So with that, I'd love to hear from you and just start off to get a sense of how you in the state of Pennsylvania, or I should say the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, have used this theory of action to plan and implement your work around SEL and how that's being connected to workforce development and career readiness.
First of all, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to talk about the great work that's happening here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So in terms of our theory of action, I first have to say that all of our work in Pennsylvania starts with equity. And our mindset and our belief system around the work of equity is that it cannot effectively happen from a top-down approach only. So as part of our theory of action, we believe that we needed to engage all of our stakeholders to not only take part in informing of what the work should look like in terms of STEM and career readiness, in terms of equitable access for all students, but we also wanted to empower our people, empower our citizens. So what you will notice about the work of STEM and career readiness is that we've gone to great lengths to engage the public, to provide us with feedback about what the needs are, the different community needs across the Commonwealth, which vary drastically from different regions of the Commonwealth. And we've worked to listen to those needs of each community and then put strategies together that will allow networks and groups across many communities to come together to solve common issues. And I could just give a quick, for example, in our urban areas, such as Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they don't have the same needs for internet access as we do in some of our more rural areas. And so that's two separate actions that have to take place for communities that do have access to internet and those that don't. Furthermore, in some of our communities, even when there is access, there could be a shortage of funding or money available to families and communities to gain access to something like the internet. And so that's a whole different set of actions that need to take place to support those communities. And so really, we've gone about the approach of creating dynamic ecosystems that bring together what we were calling stakeholders, but we've been even upgraded that idea. And we realized that we don't have just stakeholders, we have vested partners. And we've created partnerships with organizations and groups who really can speak to the individual needs of our community members. And if we're working together with that at the heart of what we need for STEM and computer science, we believe that it will provide us with the ability to make sure that all of our students are receiving access to learning that prepares them for what work will look like today and into the future, and provide them with those STEM ready skills that are related to career readiness, in which where Laura comes into place.
Thank you, Demetrius, for that introduction into equity in Pennsylvania. You know, when I think of the conversations, I think of we're doing a broad approach with a three-pronged approach with the Office of Equity, STEM, and Career Readiness. And all of those require collaboration among partners, as Demetrius shared, connections. And from those connections, we have conversations to build those coalitions across our community. So I'm using all those C's, right? And tying into that, you know, early on with this work, Dr. Pam Emery had worked on and built the PA Career Ready skills and worked with the business community to identify what was needed. And they really tied into the social emotional learning, and the STEM skills are really aligned to employability skills from the PA Career Ready skills. So, you know, we have the workforce need of 91% of jobs in Pennsylvania requiring a post-secondary education or credential across all learning communities. But before we do that, we have to increase that access. And we really do that through coalition building and working with our communities. So as Demetrius shared, it may be one way in rural Pennsylvania, another in urban Philadelphia. But at the same time, we provide all of our learners, beginning with the young learners, pre-K, all the way through with the skills that they need through that social emotional learning, which does build that workforce. Our 1.74 million learners are our future workforce. So it's really those conversations and connections through our coalitions.
I'd love to know, because I think that's a lot of the, you know, the discovering what you need, what those needs are, which we can't do. The data gives you part of the story, but those conversations, right? That coalition, the vested partners, right? Being able to share. I'm curious how that then rolls, thinking about the theory of action, how that rolls back up into policy, right? So thinking about what are some of those policy recommendations, some of the policy changes that are being made kind of through this cycle of getting that input. I've heard you gave some good examples of some practice, but I'm curious kind of how equity, how SEL is showing up in some of the policy recommendations across the state.
So I'll start a little bit broadly and then narrow it down. So, you know, every state had to make some adjustments to their state education plans as a result of ESSA. And so when you look at our PA ESSA plan, one thing that is unique is that Pennsylvania, I believe, unless another state is doing this already and I haven't called up, but I believe Pennsylvania is currently the only state that has an assessment item that is not connected to a standardized test. So we have what we call a PA, and Laura can tell you all about our Future Ready PA Index score, in which schools are responsible for supporting students to create a career portfolio made up of career experiences in the classroom and outside of the classroom as part of their K-12 educational experience. And that policy piece becomes a foundation for our community organizations to help schools address that need. So in some schools, they're working with their local businesses, their local economic development agencies to create those opportunities for schools. In some areas, they're working with their local businesses, right? That could be farms in some areas. That could be certain industries that don't exist all throughout the state. And so that approach creates an opportunity for schools to address their needs uniquely. And then when you pair that with some of the coalitions we built, for example, the STEM Coalition, which brings together higher ed, which brings together business and industry, brings together educators, formal educators, it brings together informal educators from organizations like the YMCA. And going back to that conversation piece that Laura just referred to, it creates an opportunity to say, okay, how can we support schools and supporting their kids and receiving these authentic learning experiences, and not something that's just checking off of the box or not just yet another test that a student is taking, and is an actual a learning experience that we're asking schools to provide. And so it's those little tweaks that could create a lot of momentum for lots of different industries, so that cross-industry approach that's really needed in today's world of STEM and career readiness. It creates a foundation for people to come together. It gives a reason, it gives an accountability piece for schools. And then it also creates a way for businesses to help inform schools of changing practices that they're seeing across their industry, to help inform schools of what skills truly are needed in the 21st century and beyond for work.
Yeah, I don't know of another state. I mean, many states do require, and we just did some recent publication on this, individual career academic plans or individual learning plans, increasingly moving to middle grades, which is definitely our recommendation. Very few in the elementary, and there's very few levers, right? No other state's really putting that into their accountability system to say this is, they might require it, but there still is a lot of flexibility kind of in what that looks like, and still comes down to local decisions. So I think you all might be, I guess someone will be calling us up to say, nope, it's in our accountability system as well. South Carolina a little bit, but not within ESSA, which, just for those who don't know the acronym, it's Every Student Succeeds Act, which is investment in our elementary and secondary education. I'd actually love, this is not on our list of questions, but I love to kind of dig in around this because it is such a unique feature, right, of your state, and having that career kind of development and the portfolio and the experiences kind of embedded in your system from elementary all the way up. What are some of the greatest mechanisms, right, for really driving that work forward? What are the ways that you're really seeing districts stand up? What are they reporting up to you kind of on a regular basis to understand progress? I mean, I think it's such a key feature to pull together all these pieces, all of these partners around something on a regular basis, rather than just say, hey, we're focusing on SEL, we're putting these standards out there, now go. But you actually have this like really strong infrastructure. So just curious kind of how, if you could get into some of the nuts and bolts of how that's working, how that's really pulling together across all these priorities, STEM, CT, readiness, SEL, and all the other really important, and obviously just advising, career development, academic development, all those pieces that pull together into this index.
Back to the coalition work. So, let's look at the boots on the ground, what really happened. So as Demetrius shared, Pennsylvania is the only state in the country that has career education and work standards. Those standards are supported by the PA career ready skills, which are the social emotional learning skills needed to support the workforce. So, by that three-pronged approach of equity, STEM, and career readiness, in the coalition meetings, often we have our champions, as we call them, communicating about what they're doing in their best practices. So 2 examples I'm just going to give right off the top. One of our champions is Indiana Area School District. They fully integrated the PA career ready skills into their curriculum and developed a graduation project and worked with their local workforce and their chamber, and they really engaged with the coalition to share those best practices with other parts of the state who are doing similar efforts. Another champion in that in our space is the Remake Learning team that's been around for about 15 years, and they have a statewide, actually it's national festival called Remake Learning Days across America, and our intermediate unit STEM leads and our career ready PA liaisons provide opportunities for schools to become part of a challenge to earn artifacts for their career portfolio by participating in authentic learning experiences across the state. Those STEM, youth agency, community events, all free. And that's really where it happens. And there's a lot of excitement about those types of activities and examples across the state, working with our existing partners and in our coalitions.
And I think one of the things you would notice about some of the work that we're doing is that we're trying to break down some of the siloed approaches to our work. So for example, Remake Learning Days has existed in PA for at least six years. However, Remake Learning Days as a vehicle for schools to support their career readiness accountability measure is part of breaking down that silo. So we're taking some of the existing needs and we're realizing like, wait, we already have a way for, businesses are working with students and they're receiving these experiences, but it was disconnected from the work of our school districts. And so you'll see a lot of our shifts are seeing things that we have that are working well and helping to inform schools and really working through our coalitions for coming up with ways to allow those vehicles to connect to each other in a way that's meaningful for everyone, all of our vested partners.
That meaningful experience that's required by the Future Ready PA Index performance indicator marries the PA career ready skills, the career education work standards, and the STEM experience. So any district that participates, any learner receives a digital artifact and actually a real badge at the end of the school year. So there's a motivation and an excitement in the community to participate, whether it's, listening to a cartoonist, a forest ranger, a hairstylist, just about any experience can bring those skills together.
I guess I would put on my hat and I'm imagining I'm South Carolina or someone else in this space. And I know it's great to have these ideas, but one of the things that I'm really thankful for from our current administration and our current leadership across the state is that they put dollars behind supporting this work. And so it's not just the ideas, it's not really just the connection. I also have to tip my hat and say thank you to our leadership for really creating the funding avenues to make it possible for people to put their time to making those connections and building up the programs to connect with each other.
I'm going to ask a follow-up on that, but I mean, it comes back to this, right? The topic of today is having a theory of action, right? And so if you have all these pieces together, then you're able to actually have investable efforts, right? Have a rationale and kind of what you're monitoring along the way. So I'd love to hear a little bit, because again, for other states listening, I always want to know, well, how do you fund it? So what are some of those ways that this work is supported, since it sounds like you are actually funded, which is always exciting and not unfortunately always the case for some of this work. So love to hear a little bit more about what resources from the state or whether local allocations are going into this, since you opened the door.
I'll start with the easy one first, then Demetrius, yours is much more elaborate because it's STEM. Our Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry has supported teacher in the workplace grants. So that's been an investment of $2.5 million the first year, the second year, and the last year would have been $5 million, except the pandemic came along. And that really is connecting teachers and learners to what's needed in the business. And when the department took it into the step of using a targeted grant to do that, we made it about specific action plans because it usually starts, teacher in the workplace often starts with a visit, but we wanted to impact the program. So that's really one connection in funding that's been, highlighted.
When you talk about a theory of action, you're going to need champions, right? You're going to need a coalition of the willing and the wanting to go out and champion your work. So one element of Governor Wolf's PA Smart project is to fund champions. And so Laura's made mention to, we have a system of intermediate units here in Pennsylvania, which are education service agencies. So there's funding that goes to each of the education service agencies, also known as IUs here in Pennsylvania, that funds these STEM champions. And so every IU has at least one STEM champion that has a list of meaningful deliverables that they're being funded to support. And so it's really critical over time to really develop what these champions are supporting. So these champions are supporting the growing and scaling of Remake Learning Days here in Pennsylvania. These champions are supporting connections to be made to equity initiatives and career-ready initiatives. So that would be a huge chip. The other one would be PA Smart Funds, a variety of grant opportunities. So I mentioned before that every community has a different need. And so through these various grant funding projects, communities can propose projects that would be meaningful to their community. And of course, they come with guardrails, and those guardrails include a requirement for equity considerations, collecting data, all those really meaningful things that you want to get out of funding a project. You get that from a coalition of the willing, and you don't have to apply for the grant, but you get really you get people applying for and creating these projects that they're really passionate about them. And so there's a different level of engagement when people are saying, this is something I really want to do, versus if the state, me, someone in my role, the governor, the secretary of education, would have decreed or wrote a policy that says everyone must do X. You just get a different level of buy-in when you're asking your vested partners how best to support your community and what's needed. And so we really get a quality, we get quality proposals from year to year. And so there's funding put there. And I could probably talk about how that all works for the rest of our time, but that's two significant highlights of the work that we're doing here.
And I'd be remiss, Laura, because I did see you had a piece placed recently in, I think it was Penn Live, I saw it online about your Remake Learning. So congrats on that. It was a nice read. Maybe we can share the link in the follow-up with this episode. I do want to come back on that because my next question, I had a question about supporting local implementation. So I love it. Like, raise your hand if you're interested, bring your coalition, identify your local needs. It actually is very similar to under Perkins 5. We have the comprehensive needs assessment. Every district, every institution gets Perkins funds every 2 years, has to do this kind of deep dive with equity at the center of what do we really need and how are we going to leverage Perkins resources. Hopefully there's some great examples, Pennsylvania, of those things being connected, because it seems like a ton of alignment between those two. But the challenge is, if you say who wants to raise their hand, who has capacity to raise their hand, you might still miss some folks. You might still have some of those districts, communities saying, yeah, SEL is for someone else, or we don't have equity issues, or our students are fine. I'm just not speaking specifically of any of your districts, but that's often what we see. So I'm curious, what is your strategy for supporting local implementation, right? What's really how are you both driving those that are raising their hand, but those that may not be able to raise their hand, or not understanding the opportunity, or don't have the capacity to pull the coalition together? And maybe that's where the ESAs, the IUs come in, but love to hear kind of what you're doing to really make this border to border, that every district, every community in your Commonwealth is able to really move forward with this and drive this action.
I think that, one of the goals around PA Smart and that coalition building is creating a system. So what we've done in Pennsylvania, the Department of Education aligned, we aligned a map of 10 regions to have an intermediate unit point of contact in each region. And those same 10 regions are aligned to the Department of Community and Economic Development. They call them Partnership for Regional Economic Performance Prep regions. So aligning those with a statewide map is helpful, because in Pennsylvania, we have 500 plus school districts, 29 IUs, 22 workforce development, it never stops. So what we were finding was exactly what you're saying. How do you make everyone aware? So we have found this to be, it's a constant, it has to be your mission every day. What is a career ready PA, all the way through the branding and hashtagging and sharing STEM and PA, hashtag career ready PA, working, noting excellent and best practices and activities in career and technical education and STEM activities. So it really comes down to awareness. So when the career ready PA system was was developed, we did go to each of those 10 regions, met with who were their champions, pulled them together. So there's some ownership there. So we pulled the champions of the champions into this monthly, Career Ready PA coalition concept. And of that, this is where we work together with our STEM leads with a specific festival, which was Remake Learning, as was shared in that. So it's not just conversation. We've had partners on there that developed pre-apprenticeship programs from hearing of a post-secondary initiative, a business working with labor and industry. So we're getting that cross-agency collaboration, building ownership, because we show something unique and valuable from every region in the state. And it really does come down, to some simple marketing. And I would be remiss if I didn't put up our sticker because, what's in your backpack, it's more than what's in your backpack. It's really who do we work with? What are our tools, whether it's STEM, employability skills, career and technical education, our IU partners, our stakeholders across the state. It's I would call it a battle, but in some ways it is. You have a state with local control, and that is what you run into. You run into the, we're good, we don't need it. And sometimes you have to, knock on that door, pick up the phone and say, this is what we have.
Any lessons learned, or what other states should know that are listening to this, whether they're at the beginning of their journey, whether they're further along? What are some of the greatest lessons that you could impart to other states as they kind of engage in this work and can learn from what worked or what hasn't worked along the way?
You have to listen to your stakeholders, your vested partners, whatever you want to really call the people that you need to build a coalition with, especially if you're serving in a state that is of significant size, like Pennsylvania. We have so many diverse communities, and a statewide, one single statewide approach is just not going to work. And even if I came up with 10 different approaches, I'm just not connected to the unique needs of some of our communities. And so you really have to seek out members of every community. You have to find those champions. Daily, we ask who's not in the room, like why, who's missing, whose voice are we missing, what don't we understand, as we look to engage all kids. And so I would say that's the number one lesson, to just continue to ask who's not in the room, why, who's being underserved, and why, and how to either expand a coalition, create a new coalition, or maybe there are some things that already exist. How can we connect things that already exist together once we recognize the gaps that we have in the communities that we serve?
I would say one of the areas that I've noticed a positive impact is to share success stories. So when you have a plan in mind, or you've worked with your partners, when it comes to the end of the year, or at a certain time and something's really gone well, let's share what we've done together, what we've owned as a group. But what one of our goals was this year, because then it continues to make that connection and always keep the conversations going. I think that's really key, and build your capacity. There are never enough partners.
And I think it definitely strikes me. I mean, one is everyone at the state agency, right, kind of speaking the same language, being able to connect these dots as they're going out and doing different work. So it's kind of the repetition, right, is really important in the local. I think the success, being able to show what this looks like in a rural community versus an urban community versus a high resource suburban community, right, will look different, but there's a place for all of those. And I think this regional play is one that we're seeing, certainly on the CTE side, of really being able to have really focused regional based conversation that allow for that ownership, the differentiation. So it sounds like a lot of those pieces coming together. Many states have pretty big elections coming this fall, gubernatorial, impacts on chiefs, impact on state boards. So I think that's a good, how do you really shore up support, tell your story. And of course, always love the connection to data and actually having outcomes and how this work is driving it forward. So this was wonderful. I wish we had more time. I certainly have more questions. Laura and Demetrius, thank you so much.